Mergeam, vorbeam ca singur, așa, moară, mă lăsa, nu zise niciunul, nimic de pe stream de aici. Of. Ce să faci, mă, asta e, băieți. Uite, 29.000. Let's see. Sunt vreo 30 de secunde de delay, ceea ce e mult, din punctul meu de vedere. Nu știu cum se vede stream, cred că se vede ok. Ciubar. Nu știu la subscribe, băi, cum se aude asta. Vedem cum merge treaba. La streamul acesta minunat. Ah. Wow, 55 de FPS-uri. Ce se întâmplă? Alo? Alo? Revin și eu. Bună, Bogdane, Bogdan, ce faci, Bogdangi? Ce faci, măi, Bogdangi, măi? Gata munca. Poți să intri pe Discord dacă vrei să ne terminăm, dacă nu-i trebuie. Că sunt singur, intrai puțin. Începe acum 20 de minute, e un announcement la poie și intrai să văd cum e. Vrei să văd ce zic ăștia. Încercăm și pe YouTube să vedem cum se treaba. Vedem. The Crushable. Crushable. E că somn. E somniac. 10 minutes, boys. Let's go. Let's go. Let's see what they announce. Maybe they break something or repair something or change something into better things, you know. Things like that. Da, totul merge. E bine. Ar trebui să meargă destul de smooth ăsta. Ar trebui să meargă destul de smooth. Din câte am înțeles să fie liga de crafting again. Dragii de ei, mă. Ce să zic, mă, nu uite pe aceea, aștept să dea drumul la ligă. Mă rog, la announcement. Ce zici că face? Păi în 5 minute acum. Acum 5 minute dau drumul ăștia. Deci să intru pe aceea, să văd cum merge cu stream, că îmi luai pleacă de captură. Am venit astăzi. Da, una mai șmecher. Vă zic că n-are treabă, frate. E șmecher acum. Fii atent, făcui clon la calculator, la main monitor, știi? Nu mai dădui drumul. Nu, păi unii aveau probleme cu plăcile de captură că le făcea screen tearing. Și trebuia să mai pornească un OBS, o instanță și să dea projecție la ăla la Elgato, știi? Pe streaming PC. Și vă zic că merge forță, încercai pe Tarkov. Acum să văd și în joc, că n-apucat să mă joc nimica. O să bag puțin pe după aia să vedem. Să văd dacă îmi face screen tearing. Dar n-ar trebui, că mă uită și nu fac. Că îmi făceam joc, adică intrai în Tarkov și făceam sus-jos, știi? Și n-avea treaba. $850 de lei, la fel ca cealaltă. Păi da, o milioane până la. Păi e investiție că are, de ce o atras la ea? Că are ăla VRR, știi? Refresh rate, variable refresh rate. Și poți să bagi în ea până la 4K 60 FPS sau 30 FPS, știi? La pass-through. A, nu, îți dai seama. Păi nu, o să joc tot la 1080 pe eu, dai seama. Și sper să nu mai trebuiască alt calculator pe la mea. Bă, uite, task manager-ul frumos, așa. 10% CPU, nu știu ce, Shell Infrastructure Host. Căcaturi de la... A. Ok, pula mea, 34%, 35% CPU cu multe... Cred că am cel mai multe prostii deschise, gen... Twitch-ul... Care consumă și asta. Adică Twitch-ul că ăștia fac pe Twitch stream, știi, și mă uit la ei, știi? Uitați să vedem ce pe ăștia, ce zic despre noua ligă. Da, da. Ah. Ce mi se pare la ăsta e că e prea mare delay, e de 30 de secunde la YouTube. Da. Un minut și 55. Oh. Și săptămâna altă începe liga. Da, pe parcă 7. Parcă pe 7. Păi a fost Diablo. Au fost ăștia de la Diablo și de aia. Păi așa zicea și Grigore că o să-i facă după liga, după ce o să dea ăia drumul la Diablo, o să dea drumul la păi. Păi nu luna aia, cred că următoarea ligă. Nu cred că o să mai facă. Păi da. No, da. Da. Ia să vedem. 15 secunde. Hai bă, dați drumul.
Hi, I'm Chris Wilson from Grinding Gear Games. Thanks for joining us for today's live stream as we unveil Path of Exile Crucible, which launches on April 7th on PC and Mac, and on April 12th on console. Twitch drops are enabled on today's live stream, so make sure you follow the instructions below in order to claim your Sphinx wings. Speaking of live streams, this is our last dedicated Path of Exile 1 announcement stream for around 6 months. That's because our 322 expansion announcement will occur during the ExileCon livestream in late July. Set yourself a reminder to tune in, because we'll also be unveiling massive amounts of information about Path of Exile 2, including revealing the date that its beta will start. Okay, back to today's livestream. Here's what you can expect. We'll start with a trailer for Crucible, followed by a deep dive on the League itself. Then we'll cover this expansion's endgame improvements, including the introduction of Atlas gateways and revamps to both Breach and Abyss leagues. We'll discuss changes to Path of Exile's balance metagame, including changes to the passive skill tree, its masteries, an overhaul of the Saboteur and Pathfinder Ascendancy classes, 9 powerful new Val skills, and some unique items you can build around. After that, we'll cover improvements to the Ruthless game mode and the League launch boss kill event, before diving into the new Supporter Pack series. The livestream will then conclude with a Q&A session between Ziggy D and me, where we'll answer questions from Twitch chat. After the livestream, we'll drop the full patch notes. Let's get started with the trailer for Path of Exile Crucible.
Hail, one of many. Eons ago, my kind walked the molten surface of this world. Now, we seek a champion. You must endure the heat of the Crucible.
Ce să fac? Păi da, cum vrei să-ți dau mai ușor? Dă tu din Discord.
Unlike any Rayclast has ever seen.
Oh, what? Passive 3? What the fuck? Nani?
Take up the power of the Titans and bring obliteration.
LOL, du-te în pula mea. Ce bagă ăștia, păi. Du-te în pula mea. Poggers, frate. Deci băgară gateway-ul coaie. Jesus, ok. Mă mai auzi? Okay.
In Path of Exile Crucible, you'll learn about an ancient race of titans who once shaped the primordial surface of Rayclast. In this league, you will earn the ability to forge their power onto your weapons. And what form does that power take? In an iconically Path of Exile way, it's the ability to imbue your weapons with their own passive skill trees. These Crucible trees can have quite an impact on your character build. For example, in addition to the regular mods on this bow, its Crucible tree grants additional physical damage, physical to chaos conversion, the Master Fletcher notable passive, improved grace effect, and level 10 lesser multiple projectiles. While this is certainly a decent tree to get, it's not even the maximum depth and could be even more optimized for your build. In order to forge these powerful trees onto your weapons, you'll need to complete crucible encounters. There's one in each area. Each encounter takes place at a crucible forge. As you approach the forge, you'll have the choice of which of your equipped weapons you want to focus on. This can include ones on your alternate weapon swap if you want to improve one you're not currently using. After selecting a weapon, you channel it at the crucible forge to spawn monsters. The longer you channel for, the more dangerous and rewarding the encounter becomes. As you spawn additional monsters, they combine together to create larger and more fearsome foes that grant even more experience for your crucible passive tree. Being able to ramp up the difficulty of the encounters is a double-edged sword. While it gives you the opportunity to make rapid progress on your crucible weapon crafting projects, it comes with significant risk to your character. It's easy to accidentally overwhelm yourself and make an encounter that is too dangerous. Channel carefully and adapt to what your character is capable of. When you first find a weapon, it doesn't have a crucible tree unlocked.
What's that skin? No?
Channeling that weapon at crucible encounters will unlock and reveal its tree, as well as allocating the first skill. You can only allocate one skill at each tree depth, so you'll need to decide which path through the tree is best for your build. As you get deeper into a tree, more and more experience is required to unlock skills. The final depths can take quite an investment and can only be found rarely on endgame items, but also have some of the most powerful properties. For example, this wand has 2 depth 5 skills to choose from. One of them allows all damage from your Freezing Pulse and Eye of Winter skills to poison, and the other allows various brands to be attached to your Summoned Reaper. There are many such modifiers to skills that will enable very interesting build combinations. In addition to all types of weapons, shields can also be empowered with their own crucible trees. Here's a relatively simple low-level example. It gets a bit crazier as you approach the endgame. Speaking of the endgame, in endgame crucible encounters, you'll occasionally find igneous geodes, currency items that can be cracked open to reveal a primeval remnant. This is a map-like item that grants access to the Forge of the Titans, the culmination of your crucible journey. These primeval remnants always generate as rare items. Half of their mods are upsides and half are downsides. The upsides generally increase the rewards of the area or add special crafting options. For example, causing monsters to drop divination cards or magmatic ore, a form of tradable itemized crucible tree experience. The downsides are quite punitive compared to most endgame maps. Ideally, you want to find a primeval remnant that is really rewarding upsides alongside downsides you can handle. If you don't think you'll survive a visit to the Forge of the Titans, trade the remnant away to someone else and gamble on cracking open another geode. If you survive and manage to reach the end of the area, you'll find the aforementioned forge, which allows you to merge crucible trees on 2 items together. The way this process works is that you provide 2 items of the same class. For example, a pair of bows, a pair of shields, or a pair of one-hand axes. One of these items will be melted down and applied to the other, which will keep its regular properties. Their crucible trees will be merged together in an unpredictable way, taking elements of each one. This is a little reminiscent of how recombinators applied to item mods, taking parts of each crucible tree and merging them together, as well as randomly upgrading, downgrading, or mutating skills on the resultant tree. While this process can create some really powerful trees if you get skills you wanted from both items, it can also completely wreck your precious trees, so take care choosing which you risk combining. Also, like recombinators, there are ways to manipulate the system to improve your odds at getting certain outcomes. For example, any skills that have been allocated are more likely to show up in the resultant crucible tree. By default, you can only add crucible trees to non-unique items, but it's possible to get a mod on the Forge of the Titans map that allows you to imbue a unique item with a crucible tree, which can then be leveled up via regular crucible encounters. To combine crucible trees on unique items together, you'll want to find a crystalline geode and crack it open to reveal the secret higher level version of the Forge of the Titans. I probably shouldn't say too much about it, but it will let you do some interesting things with crucible trees. There's an important thing to note about crucible trees on unique weapons. In addition to being much harder to unlock, there's a special rule about how they can be combined. A unique weapon must be combined with another copy of the same unique weapon to merge their trees together. Because this destroys one copy, getting a good crucible tree on a unique weapon makes it insanely valuable. It may also raise the trade value of all unique weapons by quite a lot, as players sacrifice them trying to create perfect crucible trees. Occasionally, you'll find a crucible passive skill tree with a special skill that indicates that the item will sell to vendors for a specific item in addition to its regular sale price. These vendor skills usually occur relatively deeply in the tree, so take some effort to allocate, but usually don't block skill choices you'd make when leveling the item up for use. The presence of these skills presents you with an interesting choice about whether you want to use the item or sell it to a vendor, and whether you want to spend your Crucible experience either revealing new trees to hunt for good skills, leveling up items to use, or leveling up items to sell. Crucible also features its own unique items you can earn. For example, El Abin's Visage, a unique helmet, is special in that it's the only armor piece other than shields that can receive Crucible passive skill trees. Wearing it allows you to double down on certain properties that are only available through these trees. There are several other unique items exclusive to Crucible for you to discover in this league. Crucible is a dual combat crafting league with a focus on encounter difficulty scaling and deep weapon customization with a power level that we have never seen before. Without a doubt, some of Path of Exile's most powerful weapons will be forged in Crucible. We can't wait to see what you manage to create. Like all recent Path of Exile expansions, Crucible includes a lot of changes with the goal of improving Path of Exile's endgame. One area we wanted to address was mobility on the Atlas passive tree. Often, you'll find yourself in a situation where you want to specialize in leagues that are on entirely different sides of the Atlas tree. Or maybe you want to focus on the type of altar that isn't near the leagues you have picked. To solve this, Path of Exile Crucible introduces Atlas Gateways. These are nodes that you can allocate on the Atlas tree that allow instant travel between two locations. There are 3 pairs of gateways, each allowing travel from the left side of the tree to the right side, or vice versa. Each end of the gateway consumes 1 Atlas skill point to allocate, but will potentially save you large amounts of travel points.
Nice. Foarte nice.
In this expansion, we're targeting a couple of endgame leagues that have fallen behind other leagues on the Atlas tree. Let's start with Breach. In the live version of Path of Exile, there are 5 tiers of Breachstone. In Path of Exile Crucible, we're raising the area levels of Breachstones to a much higher baseline level. 81 for elemental ones, 82 for physical, and 83 for chaos. Now that the regular Breachstones are much higher level, we have retired charged, enriched, and pure Breachstones. They will be converted to regular ones. We have also changed how flawless Breachstones are acquired. Previously, you could only get them from Maven invitations, but we prefer access to the hardest Breach content to actually come from playing Breach. Now there are 2 ways to get flawless Breachstones, through blessings, which are now rarer as a result, and through a skill on the Atlas tree. We've also improved the pacing of Breach encounters. Previously, Breaches felt pretty good early on, but quickly tapered off in density to the point where you wanted to abandon the Breach because it just felt like not enough monsters were spawning. Our changes now keep Breaches feeling dense throughout, leaning more on the side of it feeling overwhelming towards the end of the Breach. We have also reduced the duration of Breaches so there is constant monster pressure and you can get on with your mapping sooner. There are a whole bunch of other Breach changes that you can read about in the patch notes, such as changes to the Betrayal Research Safehouse, Breach Scarabs, Breachstones from Pyrrhic missions, the Breach Harvest crafting option, the Fragment Stash tab, Divination cards, Breach unique items, Atlas passives, and so on. We're also revamping Abyss in a similar way. Abyssal Depths now always contain an Abyssal Lich. Previously, the prevailing gameplay was to check the loading screen art of an Abyssal Depths to see if it contained a Lich, and bail out if it didn't. Now, the Depths always contain a Lich, removing the need for this step. While the rate of encountering Abyssal Liches is unchanged, Abyssal Depths are rarer than before. However, Abysses now have a chance to spawn a Stygian Spire in place of their reward chest, which will drop all of the jewels and other items you'd normally receive, as well as a Stygian Vice. In addition, you're guaranteed to always get a 4-hole Abyss alongside your Abyssal Depths. Previously, Abyssal Depths could only spawn immediately after a single Abyssal hole, which prevented you from getting full value from the Abyss. The Lightless Legion notable passive has been replaced with a new skill which grants Stygian Spires in your maps drop items with +1 to item level. This is intended to allow players to continue to be able to obtain item level 86 Stygian Vices and other base types as a reward for specializing in Abyss. The small passives leading up to this notable passive have also been replaced. We've done a balanced pass on Abyssal Lich encounters to make them more appropriately difficult relative to the current standard of endgame encounters. Abyss uniques have had some balanced attention also, and the details are in the patch notes. Overall, these changes should ensure you can play a wider variety of leagues in the endgame, both through being able to access them more easily and because Breach and Abyss now feel far more modern and competitive with other popular league content. A big goal of the Crucible expansion is to provide a lot of new ways to build characters, and to breathe new life into older builds. To achieve this, we're doing 2 things. Firstly, we have created many more interesting options for one of Path of Exile's core build systems, the passive skill tree. by overhauling many of its masteries. Secondly, we have revamped 2 specific ascendancy classes. As we reviewed the masteries on Path of Exile's passive skill tree, we realized that a lot of the choices were rather bland and could be a lot more exciting. We went through the masteries one by one and tried to come up with as many interesting stats as we could, ignoring what was currently there. Once we had a short list of high-quality stats, we added in the existing ones that used to be on each mastery and picked the 6 best. All of the leftover ones have been saved for later or used in places like unique items. This process was performed on approximately half of the masteries on the tree, initially targeting the ones that needed the attention the most. Previously, some masteries only had 4 options, so we've tried to increase as many as possible to 6 options. We've also added a couple of new mastery types that we felt were missing. Let's look at an example, the life mastery choices. You can see some of the interesting new options, such as the ability to manipulate your low life and full life thresholds, which allows you to more effectively use the damage while on full life support gem and many unique items. Getting a large increase to maximum life when you have no life on your body armor not only works really well with a whole lot of unique items, but also opens up new prefix composition options for rare body armors. Here you can see the armor and energy shield mastery has more options available than before. The other thing we focused on with this one is tying the mechanics together better. Instead of some being about armor and some being about energy shield, we've tried to make sure each really emphasizes having both armor and energy shield. On the Leech Mastery, we've combined the 3 increased life, mana, and energy shield recovery stats into one choice that affects all of them. The space we've freed up has been used to add some powerful new options, such as a portion of your leech applying instantly. The Spell Suppression Mastery also has many interesting options. Your chance to suppress spell damage becoming lucky is extremely useful before you've optimized your gear and haven't reached 100% yet. The third option rewards you for stacking more than 100% spell suppression, which previously had few benefits. Now it's something you can plan your itemization around. While looking at masteries, we noted that there were some mechanics that didn't have enough passive tree support, so we decided to add some more options and passive skill choices for those mechanics. We also wanted to grant more access to certain types of masteries in specific parts of the passive skill tree. For example, in order to allow more access to the attack mastery, we've added an attack cluster by the Templar and one between the Ranger and Shadow. We wanted to create more access to other forms of recovery such as regen and recoup, so we've added some new passive skill clusters. Note that there is now a new mastery called Recovery. We've also added more capacity for investment in certain mechanics that we felt could be improved, such as link skills, stun mitigation, and marks.
Plus 2 of all linked
skills. Passive tree changes are just some of the ones introduced in Path of Exile Crucible. We look forward to your feedback on the rest when you check out the passive skill tree next week.
While
going through ascendancy classes, we identified 2 that needed work. The
Both
have been significantly changed in Path of Exile Crucible. These changes reinforce their respective identities while adding some new options to build around. The Saboteur is definitely the ascendancy class most aligned with traps and mines, but the old version of the Saboteur made it difficult to play anything but traps or mines. The new version has more builds available, including a whole new specialization, Triggers. There are 2 notable passives that help with this. Like Clockwork grants you the increased cooldown recovery rate stat, which is a pretty rare one. This is great for triggered spells as it indirectly increases their damage. This notable also makes your enemies have longer cooldowns, which can be useful in certain boss fights, for example causing the Maven's memory gain to occur less often. The Perfect Crime notable passive summons 2 trigger bots, which override the location of where a triggered spell is being cast, and instead causes it to trigger twice, once from each of their locations. The layout for the Saboteur's trap and mine ascendancy passives has changed, so that there aren't separate 4-pointers for traps and mines. Now each one has a 2-pointer that is connected to the same shared 4-pointer. We have also completely reworked Bomb Specialist to be specifically tied to area damage, so it's a slightly more general skill. It both gives you some area damage as well as some defense against incoming area damage.
Jesus fucking Christ.
The Pathfinder has been overdue for some attention, especially with recent features such as concoction skills that she could get the ability to specialize in. We also wanted the flask-themed ascendancy to have a proactive way of improving life flask usage. Master Distiller allows you to turn most of your skills into concoction-like effects. Master Surgeon now effectively gives all of your life flasks the enduring effect, previously only found on mana flasks. Finally, both of the major flask-themed branches now have some form of flask charge recovery. There are other improvements to the Pathfinder ascendancy, such as Nature's Reprisal, now interacting with Wither to improve all forms of your chaos damage, rather than just attack forms of it. Check out the full details in the patch notes that we'll be posting after the livestream. Path of Exile Crucible introduces 9 new Vaal skills. Last expansion, there was an emphasis on melee Vaal skills. In Crucible, we're making sure that many other types of builds get new skills to build around. Vaal skills let us introduce quite powerful effects that we couldn't normally give to a regular skill that can be used constantly. They also implicitly act as a buff to the underlying skill. Vaal Absolution upgrades one of your Sentinels of Absolution into an Apparition of Innocence. You can only have one apparition at once, but just check out these massive AoE skills it uses. Vaal Arctic Power instantly encases you in ice, preventing non-instant actions including movement, but granting massive damage reduction against hits. After a short duration, it also starts to regenerate your energy shield and mana at a fast rate. Both the damage reduction and regeneration last for a few seconds, or until you have been hit 3 times. It cannot be manually cancelled. Because the skill is instant, it's a great emergency button against dangerous boss slams. It also makes you count as being frozen, despite Arctic Armor normally making you freeze immune. Having another way to self-freeze may be of interest to a few mad scientist build creators in the community. Vaal Lightning Arrow fires a barrage of piercing projectiles to cause lightning to strike nearby targets whenever they hit an enemy. After a short amount of time, or when they collide with terrain, the arrows randomly change direction and continue flying. This occurs a number of times before the arrows expire. Each arrow can hit the same target once per redirect. Because the arrows travel for a set time before redirecting, rather than a set distance, projectile speed modifiers affect the distance traveled. High projectile speed lets you clear out huge areas with them, while reducing your projectile speed increases the chance of them hitting the same target multiple times. With very low projectile speed, the skill can hit a single target 20 plus times. Vaal Reap conjures a ring of scythes that deal damage to all enemies in a circular area. The scythes leave behind a pool of blood that deals heavy physical damage over time to enemies standing in it, and for a short duration after they leave it. Vaal Reap instantly grants a large number of the blood charges used by normal Reap on use, as well as temporarily higher maximum blood charge capacity, substantially powering up the regular version of the skill. Path of Exile Crucible introduces 5 other Vaal skills we'll reveal over the next week. Vaal Animate Weapon, Vaal Domination, Vaal Ice Shot, Vaal Rejuvenation Totem, and Vaal Firestorm.
Oh, Ice Shot. Nice, baby, nice.
This expansion also introduces more than 10 new unique items. There are 3 in particular I'd like to show you today. Blood Price is a unique helmet that has a new effect, reserving enemy maximum life. This does exactly what it implies, causing nearby enemies to start at 92% maximum life. While this increases your clear speed against all enemies, it's especially useful against bosses. The helmet's drawback is that it reduces your maximum life, but provides decent life regeneration and block and stun recovery to counteract this. Tainted Pact is an amulet that causes chaos damage over time to heal you while you're leeching life. While the amulet provides a decent amount of life leech itself, it'll certainly require a few tricks to unlock its full potential. Widow Hail is a unique bow that is different from any other bow in Path of Exile. As a weapon, it does basically no base damage and doesn't grant any stats of its own, but it does dramatically increase the power of mods provided by your quiver. Needless to say, this could produce some pretty ridiculous outcomes with good rare or unique quivers. We'll reveal some of the other new uniques over the coming week. Ruthless is a game mode that we released alongside the Sanctum expansion late last year. It's designed around extreme item scarcity and is challenging because you're constantly behind the item power curve. So far it has found a very passionate audience of players who love how rewarding item drops feel in such an austere environment. We have some small improvements to Ruthless and Path of Exile Crucible. Firstly, Eternal Orbs are back in Ruthless. These are an extremely powerful currency item that allows you to imprint an item and restore it if you're unhappy with the result of crafting. We disabled these game-wide 7 years ago because they're far too powerful when combined with all of the different crafting options Path of Exile offered at the time. Ruthless does not have the base game's crafting feature set, so we have enabled Eternal Orbs to drop in Ruthless, albeit extremely rarely. Ruthless now has its own set of challenges to complete. Like the ones in early Path of Exile, they're and they're very difficult. Like we've done in the past, we're hosting a boss kill event at the start of the Crucible Challenge League. It'll be held in Ruthless Hardcore Solo Self-Out and will require you to kill both the Uber-Searing Exarch and the Uber-Eater of Worlds, making it by far the hardest event we have ever run. The first place winner will get to work with our design team to add a new unique item to Path of Exile. They'll also receive a transferable Ultra VIP ticket to ExilCon in July. If they aren't able to attend or already have a ticket, then they are allowed to sell this one as they see fit. Second and third place finishers will receive
Da.
a
Păi
transferable
da, după ce se
VIP
anunță
ticket to
Diablo,
ExilCon
după ce
that
începe
will also be
Diablo.
sold at their discretion. If you'd like to enter the event, just create a character in Ruthless Hardcore Solo Self found on launch day. Best of luck to everyone. On the weekend of July 29 to 30
da.
New Zealand time,
Păi
which
se
is
că asta
July
e, cred că
28
ultima
29
ligă.
for much
Și
of the
mai
rest of
bagă
the
ceva
world,
după
we're
aia,
going to be
eventuri
hosting
și chestii.
ExilCon 2023 in Auckland, New
Chestii,
Zealand.
știi?
While tickets to the in-person event are very hard to get, we'll be streaming the entire event for free. At ExilCon, we'll reveal our latest updates on Path of Exile 2, Path of Exile Mobile, and the next Path of Exile 1 expansion. Make a note in your calendar, tell your friends, and don't miss it. The second day of
Bagă-mi
Path
ție
of Exile
expansion-ul și
livestream
după aia
culminates in a
doiul.
competitive race event between some of Path of Exile's best players.
Da.
In order to select the 4 competitors, we're going to run qualifier events during the months of April and May. The winner of each event will receive a VIP ExilCon ticket, return flights to Auckland and accommodation, and will compete in the race event live on stage. All 4 qualifiers in the final event will be run on the 3.21 version of Path of Exile, which has received a fair amount of early game balance work that will change the racing meta quite a lot. You'll be able to read more in the patch notes. Once 3.21 releases next week, you'll be able to solve the new meta, practice hard, compete in the qualifier events, and hopefully win your place on stage in July. Alongside Path of Exile Crucible, we're introducing a few new types of microtransactions. An example I wanted to describe today is that of mannequins. These are hideout decorations that you can place to show off sets of microtransactions you have assembled. You can equip them with your spare micros and pose them in various ways. It's also possible to swap your entire outfit with a mannequin's one, which lets you easily store micro sets to be retrieved later.
Bă, ce tare.
Other new microtransactions coming up include wrapping paper, which lets you gift wrap items to hand to other players, or even drop in town for random people to pick up. Today we're launching 2 new series of supporter packs, the Lithomancer and Enchanter packs. Each tier contains a
Da,
pack
poți să
full
faci
of
bani
value
pe
and points,
divineri.
and several exclusive microtransactions. These packs are only available for
Welcome
the
to
duration of the
RTT.
release and will leave the store forever when it ends. As always, the microtransactions in these packs are purely cosmetic and do not affect your character's power or progression in any way. The Lithomancer series of supporter packs contains 6 exclusive microtransactions. A Tunnel Bear isn't just adorable, he will also take the place of the Crawler in Delves, lighting your surroundings and laying down cables.
What? Ce pula mea e ăsta?
Apparently, this is what happens
Ah,
when a
lot
bear gets
de...
into a kilo of sulfite. Might explain what happened to Nico. The Ring of the Demon Slayer attempts to exorcise rare and unique demons when you hit them. The souls of defeated demons are banished to the depths below.
Bă, ce mișto e efectul ăsta.
The ancient stone of the Lithomancer's armor set crumbles when you take damage, revealing the crimson core inside. The stone reforms if you haven't taken damage recently.
Bă, ce șmecherie e asta.
A sip from the ancestral granite flask causes a Karui ancestor to appear and surround you in protective wards. The ancestral portal encases you in molten armor when you travel through it. The summoned Karui ancestor rallies you to battle and honestly seems to have an unhealthy obsession with combat.
Go forth and conquer.
Ever want to practice running away from volatiles? The gunpowder foot attachment straps explosives to your legs, dispersing lit gunpowder behind you. Be careful, you can only outrun it for so long before it catches up. The Enchanter Pack series also has 6 exclusive microtransactions. The Parrot of Exile pet parrots your exile. We'll just let it speak for itself.
It would be wrong to do that here.
Wrong! I need more mana.
Drinking from the bottled storm Jade Flask encases you in a surging tornado, churning up the ground in your wake.
E
If you
greu.
stand perfectly still while wearing the enchanted armor set, it will attract butterflies to flutter around you. Be careful not to
Lasă-mă că mă
disturb.
joc și spun cum e aici pe YouTube.
Sit
te uiți
behind
la,
fighting
nu știu,
giant
mă,
purple appendages.
la
The
streamerul tău
ritual
favorit.
split shrink visually transforms breaches you find into a cult
Am
summoning
nu știu ce
circus.
caracter să-mi fac, frate.
The Enchanter's crafting bench replaces the normal crafting bench in your hideout with a suite of tools fit for a master artisan. The various crafting stations burst into life as you use them. If you've ever wanted to remind your character who's really in charge, the Puppeteer's back attachment has you
Ui, da.
covered. It
Ce
truly
tare.
is the sinister presence pulling the strings.
Ce tare e asta,
These new packs are available right now at pathofexile.com/purchase. Purchases like these directly fund the ongoing development of Path of Exile 1 and 2. Meanwhile, the Forge and Gemling packs leave the store forever at the launch of the Crucible League, so now's your last chance to purchase them. Thank you for your continued support. We're about to start the Q&A with Ziggy D. After that, we'll post the full patch notes for Path of Exile Crucible. As we approach release next week, our community team will post Crucible's challenges, information on how to update your item folders, more skill gem details, and information on how to prepare for Crucible's launch.
De ce nu se aude
On release
Discord?
weekend, we expect to launch the new mystery box and this season's Kerrick's Vault Pass, which can be purchased with points and has a new free track available.
Ah, ok.
Thanks for joining the stream today and checking out Path of Exile
okay.
Crucible. We can't wait to forge some powerful weapons with you next week. The Q&A will start shortly, so please get your questions ready.
Ia zi ceva, mă. Da, înseamnă că e de la ăștia, de nu merge. Ia zi ceva, Cuș, că ar trebui să merg.
Mă auzi?
Gata, merge, așa. Măcar să fie aceea. Hai că prezentezi ceva, Chris Wilson, nu fă fraier.
Mm.
Hai să-i dăm puțin poe până una alta. Până apare iar Ziggy. Amateresu. Lol, și Dota își face update, what the fuck.
E pe acela 7-3, nu știu. Care nerfuită pe Lina.
Hai bă. Li se blochează stream-ul, what the fuck. Ce mă, e asta mai sus, frate, nu zisă și mie. Dacă putui pe ce ăsta. Așa. Numai tâng, 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 tâng. Ajuan. Păi. Mamă, de când am mai jucat cu ăsta? Nani? One Crimson Temple. At least one Crimson Temple, please. For the last part. Oh, welcome back. A început ăștia.
G'day exiles, Ziggity here. Welcome back. I'm joined here once again by Chris Wilson. How you going this morning, Chris?
Going well, thanks. Thanks for hosting.
That was a pretty spicy, hot reveal stream. The final one before ExileCon and the last reveal apart from ExileCon's reveal for PoE1 potentially?
Yeah, well, we'll be having basically during the keynote for XLCon, obviously we'll be
Imediat
dumping
că
all the
aud
juicy
oricum.
Path of Exile 2 info, but after that we'll have essentially the Path of Exile 1 322 expansion live stream taking place from the main stage there.
The ending of an era. It's kind of bittersweet. A decade of Path of Exile action at this point coming to a close, but moving into Path of Exile 2. Obviously very exciting. So we won't be probing into that too much here because that is for ExileCon. So for now, let's talk a bit about Crucible. Has there been any reference to Titans and this very early stage of Rayclestian history before now, or is this kind of new ground that you folks are exploring this time around?
We like to come up with a mixture of taking something that's referenced and then expanding on it. And I don't want to spoil too much of the investigation of where this is referenced in the game, but we recommend looking into the Red Blade Warbands faction. That's a good breadcrumb place to pick up.
The lore experts can begin their investigations there. So the main feature, I think, of Crucible is the power that it's offering players here. How much power is there in Crucible, and are there any drawbacks to that power?
Well, you can definitely view this as pretty strict power creep on weapons, let's just say that. I mean, I'm pretty sure that there haven't been Path of Exile weapons this powerful before. So you're not sacrificing anything by having a weapon tree on the weapon, it's just purely upside. But many of the individual skills do come with their own downsides, and you can choose whether to allocate those or not. And so, on a weapon by weapon and skill by skill basis, you're definitely going to have to make decisions about what's best for your build.
When it comes to designing like power that has drawbacks versus doesn't have drawbacks, how do you decide which route to go?
We feel that having hard decisions about weapons and build choices and skill use is really interesting. It causes you to have to adjust your build around drawbacks. We don't really want to make a game where you linearly just get the ability to kill monsters more quickly without having to think. We like the idea of finding a choice you can make where you're like, like this will increase my power, but I have to work around something else. Like potentially there's a skill that increases
Da,
your
o să
fire
fie
damage,
liga de
increases
șmechere
you have slightly
de
lower fire
arme.
resistance. Not a large
De
proportion,
arcuri,
but it
cred.
pauses you for a second and causes you to think, where can I get that resistance elsewhere? Now, I want to emphasize many of the skills here don't have drawbacks. This isn't like, say, Scourge, where there's a corresponding drawback to every single one. It's just the case that for the powerful ones, we've put drawbacks on them so that there's a decision that you have to make. And it's typically the ones near the end of the trees that have the drawbacks, so they don't really block your choices very much early on.
Yeah, it feels like a big difference compared to Scourge in that regard. But I've always thought power creep is good when it's interesting, when it offers you like different decisions and an interesting extra layer of customization. Do you have any more like most ridiculously powerful Crucible trees or nodes that you've seen in testing so far?
There are some pretty cool combos. For example, if you found a skill that dramatically increases your cast speed at the cost of lowering your damage, then you may want to use, say, Summon Raging Spirits, because then your increased cast speed means you're casting way more of them, doing a lot more damage, and the decrease to your damage doesn't affect the damage of your Raging Spirits, so in that case you completely bypass that drawback and get something that's better value. We've also got some quite interesting conditional skills. Ones like, there's one I believe that grants movement speed if your dexterity is lower than 100. And so if you're able to make a build that doesn't have 100 dexterity, like for example you're just pure intelligence or pure strength, then you can easily take advantage of just a free movement speed boost.
I wonder what the option is for low int characters. Could something like this ever go core in Path of Exile, or is it just too powerful? Like it seems, I look at this and I think, no way is that going core.
We intentionally do not have any discussions internally about whether something's going core until we've let people actually play the league and get some feedback on it, because it's premature if we think, yeah, this can go core, and then everyone hates it, or vice versa, then that's an issue. So we throw it out there, see what people think. When we do integrate leagues with the base game, we typically do make changes to make them appropriate for integration, like one of the many topics for this coming year is what are we doing about Sanctum, for example. Certainly there's discussion there.
O să fie de craftat și o să fie OP armele, nu vezi? O să ce fac.
Skill-uri pe arme,
These items
și pula mea de...
Nu, skill-uri pe arme și iar le combină, din două faci una combinată.
Will they work in standard? How will that work?
They will work in standard, yes. So you can rip them from hardcore to standard right away.
It's gonna be good fun.
It's worth noting you can't level them up or allocate nodes any further in standard. Like you probably want to get the tree allocated correctly before you do ref it to standard. But yeah, you can use those skills over there.
I imagine there's a lot of experimentation as well, because you potentially want to, like, looking at the end game of this is to level up multiple different weapons, selecting the best.
Parcă mă schimbă puțin pe Diablo, sincer.
Like a blend of your perfect ideal nodes. And I imagine that could take a while to get the perfect.
Parcă m-a schimbat puțin pe Diablo, dar vreau să-i văd și în game-ul.
So there's quite a big grind to get perfect stuff, and then when you're looking at on uniques, for example, the grind is even larger. Like,
Păi de-aia zic. De ce? Că... Bine, până apare PoE 2, pentru că la PoE 2 am văzut că nu mai sunt așa culorile contrastate, știi? Nu e prea mare contrastul cum... Ai văzut la Diablo că nu sunt așa de vii culorile, așa, nu vii, cum să zic, prea colorate, știi?
Yeah, if a skill has been allocated, like as in you've chosen the skill, you've got all the experience towards it, you're getting the benefit from it and so on, then you can scour it with AUP scouring, so that will unallocate that last node there. And then for the ones that you're working towards that you haven't allocated yet, you can instead retarget the effects, the efforts of the next Crucible encounter you do towards a different node. And I wish I had graph up so I could demonstrate it,
Are
but
mai
essentially,
mult,
if I'm halfway through leveling up to
mai
one of
mult
the two
depth
choices
așa.
I have at a certain intersection, and I instead want to work towards the other one, I can just freely swap across. And once it's allocated, I have to use a scour to undo it and get that experience back.
Diablo
Excellent, that makes
4 o să
sense.
fie
The
manga.
node's available on
O să ia
two-handed
timp,
weapons,
pe un
more
an de
powerful
zile
than
până,
one-handed weapons. Sorry, you
Yeah.
have one?
până adaugă
Oh,
la aia
sorry, I was just doing
mecanici
a
noi,
quick dev
până
check to make sure I
fac
wasn't making that
ligile.
up. Yeah, nodes on
Nici
Da.
Poe
two-handed
când
weapons are
s-a
more powerful than
lansat,
one-handed
doamne,
weapons.
era
You could
terminat.
think of it as, broadly speaking,
Ce
if you
nașpa era
have
să-l
a
vezi.
two-handed weapon, you're getting the same
Era
rough power that you
copie
would
exactă
from
după
having a
Diablo 2,
one-handed
era
weapon dual
animațiile, se
wielded or
mișcau
with a shield.
ușor,
Certainly makes
skillurile
sense, and that kind
înveșinate.
of like feeds into the next question.
Fără
Like quivers aren't
animații.
craftable because a bow is a two-hander and gets that power level, I assume.
Correct. Yeah, we had the choice there of do we want a bow to be
Cred
balanced
că
like a one-handed weapon or balanced like a
2015,
two-handed weapon. And we
2016.
thought, well, probably balance it like a two-handed
Ai
weapon and
spus
just
să
ignore
ia
quivers. It means that we can double down on having powerful bow effects, and players only have to, in that case, craft a tree on one item.
Poe.
Did you ever feel like maybe we should give a special exemption to face breakers and similar items that have you not equip a weapon?
It's been discussed, but there's we don't want to have a philosophy that every Path of Exile league must work on literally 100% of builds to its fullest potential, because that really constrains us to really watered down leagues. So in a case here where a Facebreaker character potentially just doesn't get a boost like the other characters do, I mean, they can still play just like they could last league. It's that
A, mi-a plăcut mult, mă, ce
the main hand weapon damage.
Da,
They
e-
can obviously still craft a
Ce?
shield with various unique items.
Yeah.
Ce nu mă
Now,
aștept să-ți placă
crucibles,
așa mult.
like these
De
paths
ce?
are specific to weapon types. I assume bows and melee
Pare că
weapons
nu
will
ai
have
jucat
different
Diablo
nodes
3,
because they want
Diablo
different
3
things.
și ele mă gândeam
But what
că
about like
te...
swords compared to axes?
Păi, dar n-are nicio
Only
legătură
ones
cu Diablo
compared to
3. Am jucat Diablo
Asta
3.
zic că e,
Yeah, so
că e
essentially weapon
total...
types do have
Nu, n-au
mod
nicio legătură,
restrictions. So the
asta am zis și
examples
eu,
you give
că
are
și mie îmi
reasonable.
place,
The
n-are
bows and
nicio
melee weapons
legătură
have
cu
different
ele.
ones. Minion ones, caster ones, bows all have their own special.
Da,
features.
easy,
I
Cileanu,
believe in
pula
Path of
mea.
Exile there isn't a lot of direct difference between
ba-
swords and axes that would cause there to be many skill differences here, so
Faza
those
ce
ones are
o
very similar,
să-l...
but we have tried to make sure it's all sensible. You're not going to
E
get stuff on a weapon
cu...
that's irrelevant to that weapon.
Great. Will that unique
Cu
crucible
asta,
helmet, the
cu
Elabin's
zonele că sunt
visage, just have a mixture of
scalabile,
everything, or how
adică
does that
dacă
work?
te duci
That one gets
și
shield
ajungi la
ones.
level mare,
Oh, okay. So shield
te
probably
Da.
duci și te
shows
duci
then
înapoi la
has more
level de level
defensive
1, level
oriented.
3 și bați,
Yeah,
ai
I
ajuns pe ea
believe
să
that
bată.
it gets shield ones, but it can't give you like
Aia de
static
level 3
local
o să
block
facă
and
în
various
zona
other
aia
bits and pieces
respectivă,
that
mă
wouldn't
refer, o
work
să
very
facă
well.
la fel de damage cum îl faci și tu, știi?
Now,
Asta e
on
că nu e
unique
power,
items, once you add a
asta
crucible
e...
tree to a unique item in the primary
Cred
remnant
că
map,
damage-ul se
can you
scalează.
progress the tree and unlock nodes in
Nu.
regular
Cred că-
crucible content encounter, or do you have
Se
to keep
scalează
doing
totul,
the
man.
maps?
Scalează
Nu
You
știu.
can
deci
unlock
automat,
nodes the
dacă ești de
regular way.
level
So
pe aia, dacă
basically,
ești de
doing
level...
that map, if you get the
zicem
mod
Păi
50
da, dar
de
cum
lei,
îți scade,
Crucible,
înțeleg, dar cum
Uite,
scade
moderate
procentul ăla de
mod
viață?
certainly requires you to get lucky and get it. Then you've kind of
Cum să
unlocked
fac
the
eu?
ability of that unique to then have a tree that's explorable.
Care
At that
automat
point, you can then
întotdeauna.
just go back to regular content and
Să
Păi,
ai
regular
cred
low
că
level
la
units
poie.
alea de...
and level it up. It's
A?
only when you need to get a
Cred
second
că
copy
la
of that
poie.
unique effect and or you're
Man,
combining
Poe
that
nu
you need to
scalează
go
nimic,
back to
Poe are
the
levele.
Ba, au
Dacă
și
e-
downscaling, e și
Now,
downscaling.
viewers are always looking
Ba
for
da, dar
clever
vorbim de
ways around the
foarte
system. I
puțin, dar
saw
dacă te
one
duci
that
pe o
was
artă de tier
if
1,
you
poți să o bați.
take a item that
A,
already
da,
has
mă,
crucible
da,
and
dar e și ăla
enhance
de
it into a unique,
downscaling.
does that bypass the
Cred
primary
că
macro?
cam
Păi
așa
e,
e.
dar nu e în
Or you lost
comparație
from
cu
doing that?
sistemul ăsta,
It
care...
does. Oh, okay, there you go. Chancellor's
Și asta ce
going up.
înseamnă? Asta
any
înseamnă
solution here that
că
involves more gambling
să
from
te
the players
bați
is happy
cu
with it.
scaling-ul mai mult,
Okay.
că
Now we have some
statusurile
tech
nu iau
questions on these
avantaj
topics
dacă
as well.
automat se
So,
scalează cu zona.
crucible interaction with mirrored and
Power-uțele din
corrupted
item.
items. Can you do anything
Da?
with those, or are they locked out?
Okay, so
E mișto, adică în
there's some
sens
fun
e...
stuff you can do in a higher
Adică
tier
că
version of the
dublu,
endgame map,
adică
the
nu
one that's
stai
really
să
hard to get.
ai un
And
power
an
spike.
example here, and we don't want to
Pula mea,
spoil
în
too
fine.
much, but an example, I believe, is that there is a mod
Curios și
which
adaugă
enables you
nou
to
la
use... Is it a mod or a
ligă
basic
și
mod?
ăștia și sezoanele, că
Right, a mod on the
cosmeticele o
map
să
item
fie
that enables
așa,
you to
acolo
interact
nu
with
mai zic
corrupted
că
items, for
cosmeticele
example.
sunt cele
And
mai
so
tari
there are
cosmetici.
exceptions that you can bypass. I still believe
Păi
you
e
cannot do
minciună,
anything
cred
with
că.
mirrored items,
Ăla,
right?
n-ai văzut ce grafică mișto are la când dai pe caracter?
Yeah, so mirroring an item does copy
Da.
the tree, but once you've got the item
O să
mirrored,
bage
it's
și ei cu
unmodifiable.
bani, dai seama.
Okay,
Da.
will you,
Separat față
this is a
de...
question I think for
O
Ruthless.
să
Will you
facă
be able to
bani.
imprint crucible trees?
Da, deci trebuie să mă găsesc la un boss killer
Yes,
prima
I don't
dată.
see why not.
Alright,
Păi.
cool. Will dancing
Poți
dervish
arca și
benefit
acum
from the
dăm
passive
power la
tree while
arca
the
și
item
auzi.
is disabled? This is kind of
Văd.
feasible questions like about energy blades and things
Dar
like that.
problema e că e leșinat la boss, la,
changes in
la
how
survivability.
Îmi place
We
playstyle-ul,
certainly had bugs
mă
related to
pradem
putting
așa. Am
energy
jucat
energy
primele 3
blades in
Legion,
the
apoi nu mai
crucible.
arca jucam
That
și
was
eu și
from
Mugurel.
time.
A jucat voi așa ceva?
Da, mă, primele 3 legi în 2013, 2000, până în
We'll have to look into
2014,
it. I
aproape
mean, I'm
un an de
certain the
zile.
QA team have gone
Oh,
through
nu,
everything
și
in principle,
2014
but that
inclusiv.
wasn't percolated up to me. But we'll make
Așa
sure
și
sensible
Arcaș.
outcome applies.
Talking now
Then
about
we-
the trade a
Era,
bit, how will trading items with Crucible trees work? Will you be able to search for nodes on the trade
era
site?
ce era? Era
We are trying
nu
to
era
get that
Poison, era
functionality, but it's
Protuza
worth noting
ăla.
the way that this works is the trade site
Era
is
Thunder.
put together by one of our staff members who's very busy, and he
Ai
only
și
gets
mai eram
the copy
că...
of the league to go
Parcă
and
și
do the trade
Poison
site
ăla
stuff
cum îl
like
ține. Da, și
yesterday kind of
Poison ăla.
situation. So
Adică
he has
4
a week
skill-uri
to
pe
get Crucible
arc.
support working, and so
4
we're
de
working on it.
Magic și 2 de
It's difficult
Typical.
in this
6 în
case. We
total, mă
normally
aduc
can
aminte și
easily
acum.
within a week sort out any
Ah.
itemization stuff that came from a league,
Atâtea
and in this
skill-uri,
case it's
acum
quite
sunt mult mai
complicated,
mult.
as you can imagine. So we have no promises there, but yeah, of course we wanted to work on the trade site. And it's worth noting we do have an API, so if the public want to take the API and implement it better than us or faster than us, they're welcome to do so. But in the meantime, yeah, we'll try to get it up, and
Asta
we
e care
want it so that
merge.
people can easily identify certain nodes and trade for the items. And my expectation is that it will probably be straightforward to find items with a specific node, but doing complicated searches involving combinations of nodes and other stuff will certainly not be possible initially. And so I think that the worst case scenario is players are going to be able to find a bunch of items with a node that they're looking for and then manually examine them to work out which one they actually want to trade for. And that's not a terrible compromise. In fact, it's personally how I prefer it to work, so the trade is a bit sticky.
I know. That poor developer, though, I imagine this is quite the nightmare on the web dev front, but I hope they take our energy and Path of Building also take our energy. Now, magmatic ore was something that was kind of just subtly referenced in there. It was said to be a way of having tradable, itemized crucible tree experiences. Hilarious comment. Can you tell us anything more about what these are and what they do?
Right, so it's Crucible Tree experience rather than experiences, which means you gain experience for the tree that you've got. So you consume the magmatic ore, and it levels up your item as though you'd done encounters. And so it's worth noting, this is not meant to be the efficient way to level up items, right? It's certainly not the case that people are going to bypass the encounters and just go and trade for these and they never have to actually play. This is a really inefficient way of doing it, but it is possible. If you're currency rich and time poor and need to find a way to get that last bit of experience, then this is a way to do that. It's kind of like a faceter's lens being a single-use item that grants the experience, and I suspect that, it's obviously going to be priced in the economy based on how useful it is, but at the end of the day, it's not going to be the primary way that you level these items up.
Right, gotcha. I mean, I feel like if there's a way of efficiently playing the game by not playing the game, someone will figure it out. In general.
Yeah, it's dangerous for us to add, but we do like the idea of a limited amount of tradability here, and there's various ways to get it as well, which is interesting. Like there's sell nodes on the trees, as we call them, the ones that you can vend. You can vend the item to get some. There's mods on the in-game maps, and it helps a bit because when we were designing the end-game map, we didn't want the individual monsters you're fighting there to work towards leveling up a crucible item when you're already expected to bring multiple crucible items in with you in order to combine the trees together.
Right. Those nodes that allow you to vendor items for different rewards, it's a clever solution to the problem of why engage with the mechanic if you don't have an item that you actively want to forge right now. So how often do you find these nodes, and are they always substantial rewards, or are they some smaller ones as well, like a few Alex or a Chaos Orb?
It's worth noting, we believe that people always will have items they want to forge, and the goal of these vendor nodes is to tempt them away from that. Like at any stage, you could be working towards making the best item on the realm, but instead, oh, there's a divine orb if I just sink in a bunch of encounters into getting that. And so it's a job well done of these nodes if you are sitting there getting, currency rather than actually making the most broken items. Having said that, we suspect people will work out the value of the broken items and realize those are worth going for. In terms of how often you find them, they're mostly in the end game, and they're not too common. Like, you're not going to be sitting there with a stash full of them trying to, just swim in currency. But at the same time, you'll probably have access if you need one and you don't have a thing you particularly want to focus on at the moment. It's just so encounters don't feel entirely wasted. There are also some cool little tricks and combos that we aren't going to delve into, but it's worth having a look at that. In terms of what types of currency, it's various currency, starting at mid-tier stuff. If you do find things like Chaos Orbs, they'll be in larger quantity, and you'll have to do the math of basically how much experience am I getting versus what the currency payoff is versus what other opportunities I have for my time at the moment, and, it'll be straightforward to work out which ones you're wanting to do and which ones you're wanting to trade away.
Te pare că dă bine cu iShot, nu?
On the maps side of thing, how rare are those like geodes that you can crack to get those maps, the like end game content of this?
So there's two tiers, and It's worth noting the acquisition here is subtly different than the way we normally do these maps. Like, these are always rare, and they come through this stacked deck like currency item, which is the geode that you crack open. And because it comes through the currency item, your ability to find rare items doesn't affect the rate that you find these. Like, you're getting just currency essentially to get them. And then there's the the unwrapping experience of seeing what the mods are on it. Now, the lower tier one is something you'll certainly play in maps often, right? Like, it's, you're not finding it every map. Maybe you're not even finding it every 4 or 5 maps, but you are finding it pretty commonly. So you're getting a lot of access to combining trees together. The higher tier one, on the other hand, is harder to get because that lets you do some really interesting stuff. So that one is certainly pitched quite a lot rarer than the first one.
And you're being pretty coy on these maps and what they entail and what the higher
Yeah.
version does now.
And this is for a few reasons, right? Like, first of all the rates I'm talking about here, like, they're changing in this last week. This last week is the point where we massage it from being this works and is cool into a fine machine that works perfectly with the right, economic implications and so on. We're starting the alpha shortly, like, in 10 minutes kind of thing. And that's going to give us really good feedback there. We've got a week of iteration now that everything is working and great, and so things will change. There will be more mods added, there'll be mods removed. And so if I go into too much detail of listing every mod, it's just going to be wrong a week from now when we've had time to really hone it.
Fair enough. Let's talk a bit about the challenge of this league. So, the longer you channel the Crucible Forge in a map encounter, the more dangerous it becomes. What makes the monsters dangerous here?
So as you channel it, more monsters are spawned, and they combine into larger, more impactful monsters. So higher tier monsters here, we've got an internal tiering system. The higher tier monsters are generally more likely to be magic, rare, or unique. And the longer you channel, the more damage and damage reduction every monster gets. Also, more difficult encounters are more rewarding. So generally speaking, play the hardest encounters you can. But it's worth noting, and this is an interesting question, everyone comes up with, is there a button I can click to bypass the channeling and just have the hardest difficulty encounter, right? Fair enough, no one likes having to wait a few seconds, but it's worth noting the hardest difficulty encounter will probably smear you to the wall. We want, and this may be wishful thinking because some Path of Exile players are very capable, but we're trying very hard to make it so that the highest difficulty encounters are significantly harder than League content that you may have accidentally run into in the past. Now, of course, you don't need to max it out like that. Maybe only do that if you have ridiculous twink items or something. We are also trying to signal this in the UI. This wasn't shown in the video, but we are having kind of like a temperature concept where the harder it's getting, the more you see the UI getting a bit angry at you. And so I can generally handle about this amount of difficulty, and you've got an idea of where your character falls on the scale. You're certainly going to want to go as hard as you can, but our goal here when designing these risk versus reward leagues is to kill your character. We want to set it up so you overcommit and get nothing, because that way you'll learn your abilities and it's a little less gifty than if we just had every encounter succeedable.
It's like Metamorph all over again with players putting sticks in their own front tires and being like, oh no, why have I crashed? Oh. Cool.
Yes.
On that note, then, what happens if you fail a Crucible encounter? Is there some risk-reward aspect here, just outside of dying?
You only get the Crucible tree experience if you complete the encounter, but your item is not at risk. We went moderately safe with that. So essentially, if you make an encounter that's too hard, you might lose experience on your main character or lose your hardcore character or something if you die. But realistically, the only thing you're practically missing out on is finishing the encounter to get the experience.
Now, I noticed on the Primeval Remnant map teaser, there was a mod, players cannot suppress spell damage. I know the intention is to make these maps very challenging, but how do you approach making monsters harder versus disabling aspects of builds or hampering the player when it comes to designing difficulty?
So the mods of the maps are meant to be very dangerous. Like, we picked mods here that are like expedition remnants almost. Like, we want something that's very challenging, but you get fewer of them than on a regular map because half of them are upsides. So 6 modded map here has 3 upsides, 3 downsides. And the downside ones, some of them will raise the difficulty of the monsters, usually by a bunch, and some of them will hamper your build's defenses or potentially make your build not work in the map. But it's worth noting that stuff like spell suppression is more of a hampering your defenses than saying you can't kill monsters. So certainly going into a no spell suppression map when you rely on it takes away one of your defensive attributes, like be careful about that, but it's not necessarily completely breaking it for you. You're going to have to make decisions about which to play. And we strongly prefer that way of designing it. If we have to make it so that every map is playable and every character without really imposing any difficulty, then it just becomes a bit of mush. And so, in this case, you will occasionally open a geode, look forward to doing the map, and realize it's better for your friend to do it, and maybe you'll trade with one that you can do. And if you're playing an SSF and don't have the ability to trade, then you just have to make decisions about whether you run it or don't run it as the other option, or run it carefully, or make another character and play that character in that map to get value from it, and so on and so on.
All right. I always have to ask, party play, how does it work in Crucible?
So it fully works in a party. Everyone gets experience.
Ooh.
Basically, you must channel an item at the encounter at least a little bit to be rewarded for it. So there's the molten circle, as you've seen, and basically the players step inside and you choose an item and channel it. And all the channeling makes the encounter harder and more rewarding and so on. And as long as you've contributed at least a second of channeling or whatever, you're going to be taking part in it. Once anyone who is channeled steps outside of the molten ring, a countdown starts which will trigger the encounter. And it's worth noting that throughout maps, that means you can fully engage with these without any problem or loss. Like, sure, maybe, some annoying party member will make the encounter way too hard for everyone, but they have the ability to do that elsewhere in the game too. In endgame maps, each map only allows the map owner to use its crafting benches. So one geode equals one map equals one craft. You can bring your friends, they can get stuff from it, but they can't use that craft unless they contributed the map.
Some more questions from chat. How does item level and map tier affect Crucible? Can I quarry farm item level 86 weapons, they ask?
All right.
Low-level areas have way less Crucible experience.
The low-level areas give quite a lot less Crucible experience. There's an exponential curve on that to encourage you. Like, if you're playing somewhere 10 levels under you, you're certainly going to have a much better time just doing it in the maps that you're playing. Any other aspects that are worth mentioning?
Item level affects how much experience it requires to level up.
That's true. So the item level does affect experience costs for hitting certain skills. And of course, I believe that certain skills are gated behind certain levels as well, right? You really do want to be playing higher level stuff. Like maybe there's some niche place where you can get access to a certain skill and it's not too expensive to get it and you can quarry farm more efficiently, but you're kind of wasting your time doing that compared to just playing the maps that in an old version of Path of Exile, where map scarcity was more of a thing, like in, say, Ruthless, where it's actually hard to play maps because it economically destroys you to play too many, then fair enough, quarry farming might be a more reasonable strategy. But I think that in contemporary mainline Path of Exile, you're wasting your time if you're spending too long in the quarry here.
Now, the mobs that you spawn with the channeling of the Crucible, are these different to normal mobs, or are they enhanced versions of regular mobs? And either way, are they something that you can turn into a Spectre, for example? Summoner players would like to know.
There's a few questions there. So they are actually themed around the properties of the item, which is interesting. Like there's a light relation between what you've got on the item you're channeling. This is some subtlety here, but they are special. And in general, for these leagues, we try to draw monsters from the pool that are in the area, or at least the models of those monsters, just for memory reasons and so on. Is there anything else that's special about these monsters here, aside from the fact that they're quite a lot harder if you make the encounter hard?
Yeah, they have new skills, and they are spectrable.
Yeah, so all spectrable, all have new skills. There is essentially a separate set of Crucible monsters.
None of that is what I expected.
I actually personally underestimated how important new monsters are for league design. Like we've done a lot of these leagues, like 38 or 39, and if you sat me in a room alone without any other devs and got me to list what goes into a league, I'd forget new monsters. But a lot of people here realize it's critical to have it so the texture of the moment-to-moment combat with monsters does feel different than the rest of the game in a league, and so that's been quite interesting. That's something that it honestly took me a lot of years.
Da, mă, da, sunt aici, că eram pe mut. Mă uitasem la un video și mă puse pe mut. Am zis, frate, un video.
Tree modifiers, like tree that you're leveling up. You're still with me. It's not a big deal. It's just cute.
Bine, mă, du-te.
I mean, that's what I mean. Like,
Foarte
that's really
bună.
cute. Like, it's a cute detail, a nuance.
Bine, deja viitoare.
I know we're rushed to make these expansions in the cycle time we have,
Intră,
but we do
suntem
get
aici.
miss the details. And interestingly, this cycle has been 17 weeks, so we've
Hai,
had a
noapte
few
bună,
extra weeks to
Spor.
get it right. And yeah, I don't mean to prematurely curse anything, but we're actually looking at a pretty good place quality-wise. Like the number of issues we have open in our tracker and the stress on the team is significantly lower than it has been at various points. Like I think yesterday, when we were at the point where we would in the past have had 250 open issues, we're at like 87 by my count. And so, I'm not seeing overtime being done outside of a little bit of preparation for the live stream the last few evenings. And so that's looking pretty good. I think that like the incursion launch, we're going to be hitting it with like a bit of time to spare and make sure everything's good.
That's excellent to hear. And details like that, nuances like that as well. I think they really add to the like flavor of it. This weapon that you've been working on for a while is going to feel different to craft than a different weapon in a subtle way that you might not even put your finger on. And that's quite cool. So let's move on to a league revamps topic now. So the breach revamp, I feel, is actually a really clever way of dealing with the issue of like old content bloat, or of the game being too overwhelming for new players. revamp older content, shift it up to a higher level where it's discovered later and less likely to overwhelm those newer players. Now, was this the intention here or just a happy side effect?
It's a happy side effect, but one that we definitely acknowledge. So the basic way that the Breach revamp happened was we started by saying, man, there are a lot of splinters in Breach, and it feels crap to click on every splinter, and they kind of are worthless because you're working towards a Breach stone when you pick up a bunch of them.
Asta vedem
And that
ce se
Breach stone is
întâmplă
going
la
to be lower
16.000
level than you are right now. Like, you're not
de
going to care about
kilobits
that
pe
Breach stone. You're
secundă.
going to want to upgrade it multiple times before you can run it. So how do we fix this? We thought, wouldn't it be cool if splinters were rarer, so they're impactful and there's less clicks, and they actually led to something immediately good? And so we realized, oh look, let's take breach stones and just like bump them up a bunch of levels and basically make breach stones themselves valuable, because in their current form it's like based around an old version of Path of Exile. And then we realized we can just remove 3 tiers of breach stones in this case, and we just cascaded the chain of tidy ups from there until eventually breach is pitched at way more impactful, tighter than before, higher power level, more valuable splinters, and that's where we ended up.
Will you still have to do things like click breach hands in the thick of combat and like pick up those kind of scattered drops afterwards?
Yes, you do. And we think that clicking chests during the hectic combat with the chests vanish at the end is actually part of the fun of Breach. Like, here is a glimpse into another world where monsters are rushing in from all directions. What can you get? Can you kill them in time? Can you get the chests? Blah, blah, blah. It's part of the challenge of the short flash encounter here.
De ce nu se vede mai bine? Că e de la 16
And
kilobits.
so we didn't want to make it so it
16
automatically
megas.
gives you your entitlement of chest items at the end. Now, picking up scattered items is annoying. I get that, right? There's no, this is not an intentional thing that we're trying to make the player have to run around afterwards and look to see if stuff drops. But we didn't find any good solutions that solved all cases, right?
E
Like,
destul de
during
ok
this process,
asta.
there wasn't an easy
E
way of
bine,
sorting
zero.
that out that fit in with the other changes we're making. But we're going to keep an eye out on feedback. It's certainly something we're open to changing in the future if we find a good solution.
The Abyss revamp looks great. I don't really have any specific questions about that one. Maybe chat will. But can we hope to see similar quality passes on more dated things in the future? Like, for example, Harbinger, maybe?
Yeah, it's very likely. No promises though on when. Like, for 3.22, we haven't scoped out what endgame improvements are looking like yet, so it could well include Harbinger, or definitely not, and we don't know yet.
And back to that kind of initial question, which was the idea of like content bloat or things being a bit overwhelming for new players. Is this something that you guys recognize as a major issue, especially in the lead up to Path of Exile 2 with a bunch of new players on the way potentially?
We're always aware of the fact that Path of Exile is a complicated game with a lot of stuff going on, and your point about raising the level of Breach to take it away from, your introduction to maps is very valid. It becomes a thing where you know Path of Exile pretty well by the point that it's introduced, and it's difficult towing the line between... How to describe this? It's difficult towing the line between lots of content being available and content being introduced at a slow pace. One of our competitive advantages versus other action RPGs is the fact we have a vast library of old content that's fleshed out. But on the other hand, that can be a problem because for new players, when they have to understand 20 complicated systems or 50 complicated systems, it's sometimes easier to play other games that require less learning. So we're trying to make sure that many of these do actually feel pretty optional, and you get them, it's no problem for them to learn how Breach works several weeks into playing, potentially.
A bunch of people are also asking if there's any news on Ultimatum.
We have mentioned in the past that we have a plan for Ultimatum. That plan is definitely still happening, but not part of 3.21.
Fair enough. I'll just check every time until.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll be announced at ExileCon.
Maybe.
Okay. Is Ritual being looked at for improvement? It got hit pretty bad due to the removal of +1 monster level watchstones. This question from chat.
It hasn't been discussed yet, but as I mentioned, we haven't worked out the next set of endgame improvements, so fair enough. It'll be on the list to look at.
Is there any plans to change Blight Atlas Tree notables? Half of them are there to guarantee Blight events when there's already Sextants and Scarabs.
We actually did a pretty deep look at Blight on the Atlas Tree a few months ago, and there were some inconsistencies we wanted to tidy up. Again, I can't promise that's in scope for 3.22, but yeah, it certainly is something we probably need to evaluate.
All right. Talking a bit about now masteries and ascendancies, there's some pretty big announcements there. One in particular that really impressed me was the life mastery that gives 15% life if your body armor has no life on it. That kind of feels like a game changer in some ways. Body armor has always had really fierce competition, and whether something has life or not is a big part of the evaluation there. So I really like this design overall. But we do have some unique items that have 5 to 10% increased life, and I imagine that might feel like a bit of a bummer if you want to use one of those.
Well, in that case, you save yourself a passive point and you get to, go pick a different mastery, and there are some powerful ones to pick instead.
That's
We're
true.
not
A lot of the
intending
other ones.
we're not intending to go and remove life off those because of the presence of the mastery. That would feel pretty mandatory.
That'd be such a funny way to solve that problem.
Yes.
Find that no life. Now this consolation style design that like makes up for a shortfall feels like kind of new ground here, and it might have some potential use cases in other areas. Like for example, the idea of 20% increased movement speed if your boots don't have movement speed. Is this something you'd consider expanding out with in other areas?
It's currently just on the life mastery. I mean, we've got other interesting new designs on the other masteries, of course, and it is a possibility for later, but we want to be careful with this one because, like in the boots case, for example, I worry that soon you'd pick, the masteries that make your gear good, and then it doesn't really matter what your items are, as long as you, for the love of God, don't roll that movement speed or life. And that's kind of against most of how people are trained to create items in Path of Exile. So we're experimenting with body armors with life, but other things follow normal rules for a while.
Yeah, it is. It does seem kind of like an experimental thing because you're right. Like it could go the other way to what you want, where it's like warping perceptions of items in unpleasant ways potentially. So interesting. I'll be keen to see how this one goes then. A lot of the other masteries look really impactful as well. I was pretty surprised to see instant leech after that being such an issue in the past. For example, a lot of people have been hoping for like a meta shakeup in terms of changing skills specifically, but here we're getting like a bunch of new skills obviously have an impact, and then like all of these masteries and passive changes and stuff like that. Now, what factors kind of go into deciding whether you want to rebalance a skill or the other things like gear and passives around a build, rather?
So regarding the meta shakeup, we could at any point go and pick a bunch of skills and alter their damage values and so on. And we've done that in the past, and it hasn't really been as impactful as we wanted. Often what will happen if we buff things that are underused is people don't immediately notice, and then a while later someone stumbles across it, and that doesn't immediately cause the feeling of a new meta that people wanted. It feels like the same meta even though there's stuff they haven't found. And so we wanted to try in this case, leaving the skills alone for the most part. I mean, there's skill balance. You'll read it in patch notes in a little while. But for the most part, a lot of the changes come from the fact that broadly many of the masteries have been changed. 2 specific ascendancies have been changed. You've got a lot of new Val skills for many different builds, and the masteries in particular have a big impact here because they're right in your face when you're doing your tree planning. You certainly see all of these interesting new ways of building. Like an example is, let's look at stun for a second, right? Previously, everything to do with stun in the game was about how do I make it happen less and how do I have it affect my character less, right? Shorter stuns less frequently. There's stun stuff now, which encourages you to get stunned if you want to build that way. There's a passive that gives you adrenaline for like 2 seconds per 100 milliseconds of stun, I think. Is that right? Yeah. So if you can find a way of having 350 milliseconds of stun inflicted on you every 7 seconds, then you've got adrenaline permanently. And sure, that may not even be a good build, but it's a build you could do. And so we're trying with these masteries to cause people to completely rethink how they interact with these mechanics. To answer your question, though, about how what factors decide whether we rebalance a skill or other things, we haven't done a Passover mastery since they were first released, and so they weren't what we would call like modernized. And so before we go and just tweak numbers on a skill, we want to make sure that the supporting systems have been modernized. Like the breach thing, for example, which isn't a meta change, that had been a while before it had been modernized, and so it's sitting there just kind of out of whack with the rest of the game. It's not worth running until now. And so we wanted to make sure the masteries were really good scaffolding for builds before we went to tweak individual numbers.
Very cool. I wanted to deep dive a little bit into the design theory behind Saboteur. So I was pretty initially skeptical of the idea of like adding nodes that aren't about traps or mines, the core identity there, but those trigger bots look pretty awesome. Kind of changed my mind a little bit. They're quite unique. How do you go about making sure that the rest of an ascendancy feels up to the task and has some choices for players to make? So for example, you've got like Perfect Crime, the bots, and Like Clockwork, the cooldowns. Both are really great. And then you've got some other more contextual nodes in Explosives at Work, Expert, and Bomb Specialist. They're like limited to crit or cold AoE builds, for example. But they're still potentially usable. But then everything else is traps and mines, that core identity. There's like such a big divide between the two play styles there that there's not really any overlap in the nodes. So you potentially run into an issue where when you do something like this, you have no real choices to make because all of them you've only got the choices that make sense for the build and the others are completely irrelevant. So that feels like a potentially a little bit one-dimensional for Path of Exile. So kind of how do you get to this point?
There's been a lot of iteration over Saboteur, including recently. Like, we had a version in the live stream that we're ready to prepare, we're confident in, and we're good to go. And there was enough internal kind of, it might be perceived as a nerf going on that we went and changed it further, made sure that it was, we were much more comfortable with it, added more. Did we add entire nodes to it, or we literally added a node to it to make sure that there was more choice and that it worked better? Refilmed the sections of the live stream, got me back in the recording studio to do the voiceover of that, and updated the live stream at the last minute because we want to make sure that the different builds work. And the Saboteur is a little bit of a different experience than before because it now has these other options. But it also, and most importantly, is not the only way to play traps and mines. Our goal here is that if the word trap or mine comes up in your build guide, it doesn't 100% have an association with Saboteur. There are trap and mine builds with other ascendancies now. Like with Necromancer, how if you want to use minions, it's possible to come up with minion builds that are on a different ascendancy. And so the Saboteur is the obvious place to go for easy access to trap and mine power, as well as like trigger stuff, right? It's the first point of call, but it certainly isn't the final point of call for people who want to do some really wacky stuff.
Yeah, and that kind of like raises a good counterpoint, which is like, while there might not be a bunch of different choices for trigger builds in Saboteur besides the ones laid out, you have all of the other classes to decide. So picking Saboteur in the first place is that choice. So
Yes.
that, and fun new playstyles added.
The trigger bots are pretty OP.
They look awesome. So cool. Does the new passive reworks to the two classes affect Ascendant at all?
Did we change the Ascendant?
Yes, we did.
Yep. That's cool.
Awesome.
I didn't know that. Good work. Yes, we have.
Good job, background devs.
I want to look at that now.
Do you folks plan on changing passives around the tree or just the masteries that are changing?
Yeah, there are passives that have changed around the tree, right? Yeah, there's new clusters, and I mean, the patch notes, which will be posted as soon as we stop talking, have all the details, but it was mentioned in the live stream too, just in passing. Like how I mentioned early game balance changes, and then everyone comes to me and says, why are you not talking about the early game balance changes at the live stream?
Yeah,
Sure.
there was life recovery clusters. There was a few new clusters scattered around to increase access to masteries, and there was +1 projectiles.
Yep.
So that was pretty spicy. Okay. Here's a question about the Sab. If Sabo trigger bots trigger your spells on them, how do those trigger bots cost mana to trigger? Like, do those spells cost mana?
Like regular triggering, right? Yeah, it's just like regular triggering. The difference is there are two trigger bots. They run at the enemies like you'd expect. It triggers from both of them, and instead of just purely doubling your damage and moving it onto the enemies, there is a minor damage penalty so that it's not quite, literally double damage, but still obviously is a big boost.
All right. Let's talk about a couple other random questions. You mentioned a fair amount of early game changes that changed the racing meta, though this is the sort of thing that affects everyone. So what sort of early game changes can we expect? And by the way, Bex, let's flip something involving support gems. Sorry.
Yeah. So we actually have another whole skill gem and 3 support gems that we didn't even talk about in the live stream. It's 1 main skill and 3 supports, right, guys? Snipe, Mana Forged Arrows, Prismatic Burst, Momentum, I think? Yeah. So it's interesting how this happens, really, but we ummed about what to do about the ExileCon races for so long, right? Because we didn't want to just say, oh, look, it's the same Katavikil as last time, go. Because then we get exactly the same race with exactly the same racers, and it's just a repeat of the 2019 event. But at the same time, when we looked at other wacky races we could do, they didn't feel like Path of Exile. Like, Path of Exile racing is a celebration of
déjà bobo
how
is
quickly can you play
around.
through the game without random
Déjà.
mods involved. And so
Boa
when we asked them what they liked about watching the races at ExileCon was the fact that the races are doing everything that the normal players are doing just so well. Like, they're just so optimized with their stuff. So we wanted to make sure they were playing true Path of Exile. The problem is true Path of Exile is more or less pretty similar to what it was in 2019. So we said, well, what if the racing strategy is different? What if we just went and improved the early game in a way that doesn't have significant impact on the actual meta of the late game, and just did a whole bunch of tidy up in ways that really affect races? And that way, the racers can play 321, which is released in a week. We'll do all the qualifiers during 321, and that's also the version of Path of Exile that's live at ExileCon, because 322 is coming out a couple of weeks after ExileCon. So it perfectly fits a consistent set of balance that we can keep the same for fairness. And so many changes were made, and this involved some pretty radical stuff. Controversially, and this is explained better in the patch notes, we've removed the Onslaught support gem from early game situations. There's honestly, the patch notes do a much better job than I do of explaining it, but in return, other gems have been introduced which achieve similar goals to it. And so I'd recommend reading the patch notes for the full detail, but there are several new gems which do affect in-game builds, and that they're now options you have available. The favorite one that I was reading about recently was this cool, like, semi-active, semi-support gem, which is called Snipe, which in our internal description that has probably been improved since this was written, was channel to charge up your bow, gaining stages. Release to trigger one linked bow skill for each stage gained, and a few other caveats.
Oh,
so basically, you can channel and then release a bunch of bow skills at the same time. So cool stuff like that has come out of this. And yeah, it's, balance changes. There's going to be some nerfs in there. There's going to be some buffs, but they do not have a large impact on endgame Path of Exile. So do, when reading the patch notes, take it with a bit of a grain of salt at the fact it's aimed at the early game.
This is interesting because, like, in the past, the idea was talked about of having like some skills that were like the low level ones, and then potentially would transition them out of it. But it's not something that's really true to Path of Exile very often. Like, most of the time, most things that you can use in early game are end game viable as well. So this is kind of more a design of having some things that potentially are very early game and not really necessarily intended for late game.
Yeah.
Do you think you'll explore like skills more in that realm in the future as well? And is that, I don't know, something that Path of Exile 2 will feature more?
Well, Path of Exile 2 gives us an opportunity to somewhat tidy up what skills there are, and we're moving things around between levels and basically having a chance to, because it's a game that obviously involves many changes, having a chance to actually review stuff. So that helps with us working out what are the early and high versions of things. Obviously, we can make those changes in current Path of Exile 1. It's just that it comes at a cost where we take something and break it for high levels, or take it away from early levels and suddenly build, say, hey, I was using that. And, there's certainly a live cost to that.
Now, I see a few things come up in chat repeatedly, so I'll touch on those. Some other Ascendancy players. What was that?
I was asking, they want us to log in.
That's certainly that.
Okay.
There's a few other Ascendancy players who want reassurance that their Ascendancy will be addressed. I see Gladiator mentioned a lot.
Yeah, we could list the 17 Ascendancies. We don't yet know which ones are coming. Shall I tell a story? Okay, I'm going to tell you a story. Sorry, everyone who's on patch notes. We're getting story time instead. We wanted to nerf all the Ascendancies in Ruthless for power reasons. And so we looked into what that would involve. Pretty quick numeric nerfs. And while doing so, we came up with a whole bunch of new interesting stats. And we said, okay, well, we cannot release these stats in just Ruthless, right? Because that would be crazy. The community who already have low patience for any Ruthless stuff that we do would certainly find it unfair that we gave Ruthless a bunch of new interesting tools alongside a pile of nerfs. So we said, why don't we change all the Ascendancies in the core game to use these new stats as well? Not nerfing them, just making them like we've done with the Pathfinder and the Saboteur here. And so we started on that. And the plan was to do about half the Ascendancies in 321, and then also do all the Ruthless ones at the same time, figuring that's fair because there's enough stuff given to the base game. Unfortunately, we didn't get it to a state where it would actually be releasable. Many of those Ascendancies were going well, but they weren't quite finished. The internal feedback was to the point where it felt a little bit like a nerf in some cases, or it felt too much like a buff, or we weren't quite there, and we obviously can't release it unless we've had time. So then we had a situation where we're really happy with Pathfinder and Saboteur. They're going great. And all the Ruthless ones are sitting there with new stats on them. And so we intentionally undid all the Ruthless changes there to stop there being an outcry, and so that we get more time to sit on it and work out what we're doing in the base game. And so the intention is that we do have stockpiled a large number of Ascendancy changes from when we get time to do it properly, which hopefully will include many in 322. And we just have to work out politically what we do with said Ruthless changes, because I would love to release them. I mean, they're not quite ready. Like, I'm not saying we want permission to put them in 321, but we're at some stage likely to debut that set of stuff, because we do feel the power level of Ascendancies and Ruthless is too high relative to items. And so, long story short, in answer to the question of when did the other Ascendancy classes get some love, the love is half done. And so, yeah, it's coming.
The political intricacies at play here.
Yeah, it's just the problem is like while this expansion ended up with a lot of balance changes, and we're not worried about that, there was a time period when we hadn't piled in so many balance changes where it looked like half the work went towards Ruthless, and that's not a good look because it's done for the purpose of the core game. It's just if you release it in Ruthless first, you just upset everyone for no reason. And so there's a bit of politics with that, but at the same time, we definitely want to make sure that all the players feel equally valued.
Since you brought it up, let's chat Ruthless a little bit briefly. Um, will it have its own unique cosmetic rewards now that it's getting challenges? And if so, how many?
It has the same cosmetic rewards as the base game. This is
Okay.
another case here of trying to go for fairness. You can either earn the cool armor set by playing regular Path of Exile or by playing Ruthless. I don't know which is easier. There are fewer challenges in Ruthless, but it's quite hard to do those in Ruthless. So yeah, it's difficult to say. I recommend working out what your capabilities are and doing it in that mode. And there is a different totem flag. So if you do complete the challenges in Ruthless and in the base game, you technically get 2 hideout totems to show that you did.
And a bunch of people have had a chance to play Ruthless and try it out. There's been some discussion of the difficulty and whether it's a fun type of difficulty or rather where it's just slower. How do you feel about the initial version of how it's played out and the types of challenge that it offers?
We really like it internally. It emphasizes how fun items can be to find when you're desperately craving upgrades. Like, I get that it's not for everyone, they don't have to play it, but it's an experience of overcoming scarcity and feeling every upgrade to your character that we think is a really valuable thing. And what's interesting is some people, when playing it, say, to be honest, regular Path of Exile, like baseline Path of Exile that a new player installs, could actually be Ruthless, and they might have a better time than the overcrowded, very complicated mainline version that we currently have. Now, we don't plan to make that change where we swap them around, just in terms of what the new player experience people get, but it is true that if you're sitting someone down for the first time, they get a bit more of a meaningful and less complicated experience playing in that mode. Having said that, it's still an experiment, it's still a passion project that we're tinkering away with, but it also educates us a lot on the appropriate balance for item mods and how, you know, like the fact that Eternal Orbs could come back, for example, is a revelation we made that was actually pretty cool. And looking at the consequences of the different types of crafting and how they interact has been very instrumental for us. And this is all important because we have to get this stuff right with the upcoming Path of Exile 2 balance, right? We have to make sure the Path of Exile 2 is balanced as a great game from the start.
It's almost like it's a useful dev tool more than anything in that regard.
Yeah, and there's a growing community of people enjoying it, which is why we've got the boss kill race happening in Ruthless. I know that'll be controversial to some players who don't particularly want to play it, but they weren't going to win that race anyway, right? Like the people who are going to win that race know why we're putting it in Ruthless.
Oh no. Damn.
We also don't know if it even is winnable. Like, to emphasize here, Ruthless also found hardcore, both pinnacle bosses, right? That's hard.
Yeah.
There's a ticking clock before those XLCon tickets aren't valid anymore, right? The event.
It would take me that entire time to get there, that's for sure. For my own experience, a lot of the early game feelings I had echoed what you were talking about, with like the changes were very effective in making you really like feel gear upgrades and think about how you play your character, and those sorts of challenge changes were really effective. For me though, where it fell apart was actually at that end game, where the scarcity, the economy, and the map drops were so slow that even when I felt ready, I couldn't really progress in endgame at what I felt like it was a reasonable pace. Even dedicating the entirety of my currency supply towards maps, I was still kind of blanking and dropping back down to low white tier maps. And I've seen plenty of people break through this wall, so it's certainly possible, but it is slow and it bears mentioning, I think. How do you feel about like the end game progression there?
So we've made some adjustments to this in 321, but we don't want to overshoot the mark. Like, we don't want to just dramatically swing something in a way that makes maps sustain too easy. It is intentional that maintaining the highest maps requires significant economic sacrifice in Ruthless, which, as you say, some people can break through, but it's essentially the case that you almost have to just pay, a very high price to be playing red maps repeatedly. And that's in the right direction for Ruthless, and we do want it to be a little more accessible than it currently is. So I'm hoping the changes on 321 do help a bit there, but we'll keep nudging it. We just don't want to accidentally get it to the point where everyone's got expectations of sitting in red maps like they do in the base game.
All right, so potentially some smaller changes there, fine tuning things out. The Atlas tree is different in Ruthless. Chat wants to know if we'll be getting gateways there as well.
Yep.
Cool, very nice. We have a random eclectic mix of chat questions now. So I'm just gonna jump straight into these. I have not seen what they are yet, so let's have a go. Lucky Dip. Do we need to equip the weapon to level it in Crucible, or can we use any weapon in our inventory?
It has to be equipped, but it can be on your weapon swap. The intention here is that you can't be playing, say, a bow character and have some really high level wand that you're necessarily working on without sacrifice. You are making things for you. And this is also so that you're guaranteed to be carrying the item around with you. You're not having to sacrifice inventory space for it. There's a bunch of things that went into that decision, but essentially, yeah, stick the item on your weapon swap if it's not the primary one you're currently using.
Does that work if the item's disabled? Because you can do some stuff where you like put an Astramantis on and then equip the item and then take the Astramantis off and it goes red, but it's still equipped.
We'll find out.
Okay. Now chat's just doing the classic Q&A thing where they're spamming melee question mark. Like there's a question there. You do know that questions involve a few more words than that usually, but you know, maybe that's enough for you to work off. Melee?
So in the last expansion, we intentionally introduced a large number of Val skills and some other melee changes. And so the intention with the melee Val skills was to raise the power level of all of those skills because periodically you get to play them in God mode for a few seconds. And we haven't made as many melee changes in this particular release here, and that's partly because there are, you know, the other 90% of players also would like balance changes. So we definitely have it on the radar to keep an eye on, but there's nothing else in 321 apart from what you'll see in the patch notes rather soon.
Yep, so advanced skills and masteries and a couple fine tunes here. So have a read in a second when I stop talking. What happens if you animate a weapon with a crucible tree? Whoa.
It works.
Oh,
you expect less from Path of Exile?
No, I expected it to work. Actually, I'm impressed because I imagine there's some complicated things there. But
I shouldn't have done a dev check there. I should have eye contact with the camera. It works, and then quickly, they scurry to make it work.
Even things that like allocate passives, does that work? Because they don't have a passive tree, right?
E perfect așa.
Surely those don't work.
Și văd că o să mai puțin sursă de a schimba asta pentru că eu cam frânjuri laptopul ăsta.
All like Master Fletcher, for example, right? It should work. Like, at the end of the day, right? Animated guardians and animated weapons are just, like, entities that get stats, right? Like, if you give an animated weapon +1 arrows or something, it's going to fire +1 arrows, like a monster would, like the player would.
Yeah, but you're giving it a passive that then gives the +1 arrows. That implies they have a passive tree. Does that imply they have a soul?
Oh, it's technically that we're not giving it the passive. We're giving it the stat and we're calling it the passive. But we're getting into, like, internals here. Maybe we are giving it. Anyway, we're fine. It'll work.
Do animate guardians have souls?
That raises ethical questions.
Oh god, okay. Does things like pack size affect Crucible? I assume map modifiers will in general, right?
So here's an interesting one. The items that are shown in the live stream do include pack size on those the rare maps there, and that doesn't affect the
So in the in-game area, pack size doesn't exist. In regular maps, pack size does influence the value of the monsters being spawned.
Right. Okay. Yep. So the bit I was getting at was more of a side point, which is that pack size doesn't exist on the end game maps that the Crucible specific ones. The pictures in the live stream do show it. That's because we hadn't removed it at that stage, and this is because it had no way of really juicing up the size of the encounters you're finding there. So we went with quantum rarity instead. With regard to the base game, if you get pack size on your maps, it will increase the value of the Crucible monsters and their encounters. So it is beneficial to have it.
Once upon a time, GG entertained the idea of permanent skin transfers, destroying an item to create a permanent NTX. Is there any word on this, or has it been abandoned as unfeasible?
It's hard, and we haven't done it yet, but it's certainly something that we don't have philosophical problems with.
Okay. All right, chat. You been spamming anything else?
I'm going to log in soon.
Yeah, log in. Is that the spam?
Play some Crucible.
It's still typing melee. Any changes planned for expedition gear? What's next with Ward?
I'm unaware of any changes planned for expedition gear at the moment. I mean, at this stage, it's pretty much a matter of they can read the patch notes in a couple of minutes, and that will answer, Control F ward, right? And otherwise, keep posting feedback about what stuff you'd like to see changes to, and we'll look into it for the upcoming expansions.
Perfect. Well, let's make that 1 minute. People want to know if fishing rods will have crucible trees, Chris?
I'm not going to answer that. I'm going to let them work it out, right?
Perfect. All right. Thank you very much for your time, Chris. Thanks for
you're
the
welcome.
Q&A.
It's been great.
Pleasure as always.
Thanks so much.
All right. See you fine folks later. Bye-bye.
Alright, nice. Interesantă liga. Ce părere aveți? Poggers. E drăguță liga, mi-e place. Let's see the patch notes. E mișto așa. Asta la fel ia să vedem. Asta modific și pe asta. Ar fi mișto să pot să modific. Așa nu prea-mi dau eu seama. Com... That's all, folks. Imediat. Așa e când ai o singură tastatură și un mouse. Mă rog, până fac eu setările la acesta. What the fuck? Dar nu-mi place asta, că uite. Vreau page notes, vreau page notes. Îmi downloadă ăsta, ăla. Downloadați-mi ceva, niște chestii. Oh, ce e asta, mă, că ți-ești? Ăsta a făcut. Ăștia sunt toate alea, nice. Trailer final. Nice, asta e să le luăm pe toate. Stai că nu mai am loc pe hardul ăsta imediat. Drum la ceva muzicuță. Cea lejerea, nu? Nu asta, te rog. Nu-mi place. Nu știu așa mai chill. Nice. Și după cum vedeți, de fiecare dată când scot USB-ul de la cameră, mai am o cameră pe aici, începe screen, mă rog, la camera. Acum gata, trebuie să pornesc, să dau restul la Logitech Camper și totul devine la normal.
In Path of Exile Crucible, you'll learn about an ancient race of titans who once shaped the primordial surface of Rayclast. In this league, you will earn the ability to forge their power onto your weapons. And what form does that power take? In an iconically Path of Exile way, it's the ability to imbue your weapons with their own passive skill trees. These Crucible trees can have quite an impact on your character build. For example, in addition to the regular mods on this bow, its Crucible tree grants additional physical damage, physical to chaos conversion, the Master Fletcher notable passive, improved grace effect, and level 10 lesser multiple projectiles. While this is certainly a decent tree to get, it's not even the maximum depth and could be even more optimized for your build. In order to forge these powerful trees onto your weapons, you'll need to complete Crucible encounters. There's one in each area. Each encounter takes place at a Crucible forge. As you approach the forge, you'll have the choice of which of your equipped weapons you want to focus on. This can include ones on your alternate weapon swap if you want to improve one you're not currently using. After selecting a weapon, you channel it at the Crucible Forge to spawn monsters. The longer you channel for, the more dangerous and rewarding the encounter becomes. As you spawn additional monsters, they combine together to create larger and more fearsome foes that grant even more experience for your Crucible passive tree. Being able to ramp up the difficulty of the encounters is a double-edged sword. While it gives you the opportunity to make rapid progress on
Oh,
your
avem și
Crucible weapon
transcript.
crafting projects, it comes with significant risk to your character. It's easy to
Mamă.
accidentally overwhelm yourself and make an encounter that is too dangerous. Channel carefully and adapt to what your character is capable of. When you first find a weapon, it doesn't have a Crucible tree unlocked. Channeling that weapon at Crucible encounters will unlock and reveal its tree, as well as allocating the first skill. You can only allocate one skill at each tree depth, so you'll need to decide which path through the tree is best for your build. As you get deeper into a tree, more and more experience is required to unlock skills. The final depths can take quite an investment and can only be found rarely on endgame items, but also have some of the most powerful properties. For
Da,
example,
deci
this
dacă
one has
faci
2 depth 5 skills to choose
level
from.
pula
One of
mea.
them allows all damage from your freezing bolts and Eye of Winter skills to poison, and the other allows various brands to be attached to your summoned Reaper. There are many such modifiers to skills that will enable very interesting build combinations. In addition to all types of weapons, shields can also be empowered with their own Crucible trees. Here's a relatively simple low-level example. It gets a bit crazier as you approach the endgame. Speaking of the endgame, in endgame Crucible encounters, you'll occasionally find igneous geodes, currency items that can be cracked open to reveal a primeval remnant. This is a map-like item that grants access to the Forge of the Titans, the culmination of your Crucible journey. These primeval remnants always generate as rare items. Half of their mods are upsides and half are downsides. The upsides generally increase the rewards of the area or add special crafting options. For example, causing monsters to drop divination, increase the rewards of the area or add special crafting options. For example, causing monsters to drop divination cards or magmatic ore, a form of tradable itemized Crucible.
Ia să vedem ce zici băieții. Băieții care știu mai bine asta.
Flawless.
Apără pe Jones.
And breach bosses has a 4% chance to drop a breach stone instead of 12. Flush breach no longer causes breaches to increase monster density or AoE. It now causes breaches to open and close 10% faster instead of 50.
Well, I think it's just baseline now, sort of.
Yeah,
But still, that's all. What?
it almost feels like a pointless node now.
Yeah, what the fuck?
I don't think I would.
Yeah.
It depends about the problem.
You know, I'll say the fact that they're baking it in is probably fine.
Yeah.
It's probably fine. But
Yeah.
yeah, it just reads so funny, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Mersi Zizaran de
Also
win
added
să
a new
pup.
heavy breach next to flash breach. Oh.
A, deja le am.
Open and close 30% slower. So if you do find it too overwhelming, that could be a really good node early hardcore. I could actually see myself.
Ok, băieți, păi eu o să închid stream-ul, să mă uit și eu la ăștia și rămâne să ne auzim pe vineri când începe noua ligă. Crasboala.
In your map to open and close 4% faster instead of 8. Gatekeeper notable now causes
Pe așa, nu prea ai nume.
20% chance
Adică, na,
to contain
nu se
boss
uită nimeni la
breach
ăștia.
instead
Mersi
of
mult că a stat pe
and
aici.
breach boss in your map have a 20%
Și
chance
vă
to
pup, să
drop
aveți o
double
seară
splinter,
faină.
previously
Pa,
100.
pa!
And they've also lowered the max. So it might be like 3 or 5 splinters for a boss.